thank you, Joshua, and thank you for sharing that video. I think we're about to do it again, actually, and then talk about what might happen to prevent it. That's a scene you don't want to see. So what we're trying to talk about today is, in the map behind me, we do not want to see this in 2030. It's 10 years away, but one doesn't build on the waterfront or build the kind of things that need to prevent this kind of accident from happening. So let's get together and make that happen. I think I'm about to introduce Dr. Paul Kirshen, who is, I said, our science guy and our water guy, who's pulled a lot of these videos and data together to share with us today and in the past couple of years and then going forward. So Paul is a professor at UMass, a terrific guy. I think I'm teeing up Paul Kirshen right now. We just had a little technical glitch in between, but we want to gain some time. So Paul, I think you're on. You're very much welcome, and take it from there. And after that, Dr. David Abramson will lead us through a significant tabletop exercise. I'll let David introduce that piece. Paul Kirshen, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. It's great you've turned out this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about present and future coastal flooding in East Boston, and then we're going to look at that video again to really see what it might look like if East Boston had a major flood sometime in 2030. Also, that flood could actually occur today. We had a really, really extreme event like Sandy hitting us at full force and at high tide. So as I'm sure most of you remember, the bad storms we had in early in January and March of 2018, the so-called bombogenesis storms. So these are some images of these storms. So first one shows the flooding in January at the Portside East Pier condos, and then some flooding in Lewis Street near the Greenway. These are from March, and so this is at Maverick Square looking downtown across to downtown Boston. And the one on the right shows the flooding in the Shaw's parking lot. And as you know, Shaw's is the only supermarket in East Boston. And as many of you know, and as most of you believe, climate change is occurring globally. And in Boston, we could see as much as 7 feet of sea level rise by end of the century. So what could this flooding look like? Well, in this image here, in the dark green or dark grayish color, like the color of the East Boston Greenway, that's the amount of flooding you'd see. That's the extent of the flooding you would see if a storm like the bombogenesis storms struck today. Put all the colors together, that shows the flooding we might see near the end of the century. So essentially you see, because of sea level rise, most of East Boston would be flooded if we had a major storm like the storms we had in last January and March of 2018. Now, this shows in a little more detail the flooding we might see if we had a sort of a major storm in around 2030 or so, with a little bit of sea level rise, or perhaps the flooding we might get with a very, very large storm like Sandy hitting us at full force today. And you can see the flood waters would come in, around Liberty Plaza, come in around Lower Border Street, flood into the neighborhood there, that eventually go into the tunnels. Now you can see in the lower left that with this storm, essentially a lot of the area around Maverick Square is not flooded. But Maverick Square would be, certainly surrounded by water. And you can notice that the head house, well, if that water was only like a foot or so higher, the water would go into the head house and flood out the Maverick station. And what you're going to see here is, again, a storm that may occur now if it's very intense, or perhaps 2030. And you're going to see the water come in soon from essentially around AutoZone, start flying into the parking lot, starting at McDonald's. And it's going to spread into the parking lot. And there's an actual computer animation, a very accurate one, put together by a company called RPS, using data from a company called Woods Hole Group. Now the waters are starting to flood into the parking lot. So the parking lot is now flooded. Water's increasing a little bit in height. Now soon it's going to spread into the Central Square area. So this again is another view of the parking lot being flooded. There you can see Central Square, and the park is actually not flooded, but all the area around it is flooded. And then the water is going to travel down Porter Street towards the tunnels, the Callahan and Sumner tunnels, which are one of the lifelines of East Boston to Boston. And essentially, this is a view of Meridian Street and Harbor Street overlooking the tunnels. And of course, because the tunnels are underground, soon you'll see the water flowing into the tunnels. And again, this is extremely accurate simulation, animation of the sort of flooding and the impacts that flooding we might see in Boston by 2030 if a major storm struck, or could even see this year if a very, very, very extreme storm struck Boston at full force. And of course, these images show the flooding that would occur if no measures are taken to manage the flooding. So one of the strategies that Mass DOT is going to take is to put gates over these tunnel entrances, stop the floodwaters to going through. But of course, during the storm and before the storm, just after the storm, these tunnels would have to be shut down. And of course, the T would be shut down as well, because even if Maverick Station didn't flood, Aquarium Station might be flooding and other elements of the Blue Line. Now the storm is receding, and again, aerial view of the tunnel area on Harbor Street and Meridian. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can manage this flooding. So in fall, last fall, a group of residents in East Boston met with myself and landscape architect and engineering company to talk about how to prevent the flooding along Lower Border Street. And they came up with this plan. And the plan includes, first of all, 30 to 40% affordable housing in any new residential development along the Border Street, Liberty Plaza area. You can also see that it has a harbor walk there that would be, and parks in front. So you see this area here, the harbor walk elevates the land, so stop the floodwaters, but the parks in front and the other aspects of this plan provide all sorts of amenities to the community, like parks, playing fields, community gardens, and meeting places. Of course, while waiting for this plan to be implemented and built, we need to have emergency preparedness plans. And that's really what this workshop is about. So now I'm going to turn this back to David, who's going to take us to the next segment of this. Again, thank you for your attention.